Hey guys, welcome to this lecture. In this lecture, I'm going to briefly cover how to use the node editor for compositing a render. So let's take a look at the scene we have set up here. I've set up a cube with a monkey head inside of it, and I don't know if you guys can see that, but there it is. The cube is made up of a glass shader that we created, and then I've got another shader for the monkey head, and then we've got some basic lights set up in our scene with a camera here. So I've gone ahead and rendered this. It took quite a bit of time because I was using ray tracing for the transparency. And so I'm going to go ahead and bring up what that render looks like for you guys. Okay, so this is a full res render. And as you can see, we've got transparent glass here for this sphere. And then inside here, we've got the monkey and some shadows and things like that. So I'm going to take this image into the node editor, and I'm going to show you guys how to composite with the node editor. So we're going to jump into the node editor itself here, and as you can see, it's pretty much just a blank grid right now. And in order to use the node editor for doing compositing, what you'll want to do is navigate over to this middle button here, which is going to tell Blender that we're going to use the compositing nodes to composite our image. This button here will allow you to edit materials directly within the node editor. When you get into some more advanced rendering, you can use that, and you can also use it for building textures. So for this example, we're just going to use this middle button. We're going to check use nodes, and then we're going to start building our scene. Now sometimes if you click use nodes and you haven't done anything with the node editor yet, it may add some nodes for you. If that's the case, just go ahead and select all with A and then delete those. But I'm going to build one from scratch here. And so here's what we're going to do. Normally you're going to go into input here, and you're going to bring up render layers for the first node. And I'm just zooming in with my scroll wheel and middle mouse button dragging to move around. So as you can see, you've got a little preview here of the render layer that I'm on. This render layer is referring to this only render layer that we have in the scene right here. If I had multiple render layers, I could change this here. This button will allow you to render a whole new version. And so basically what we're going to do is we're going to take the render that we already created by rendering out the scene. We're going to bring it in here with those render layers. And as you can see, I've checked off combined and Z over here under passes. So it's going to give me my actual image, the alpha or transparency of that image, and then my Z pass, which is the depth of the objects within our scene in relative space to our camera. So let's go ahead and add another node here, which is going to allow us to view what the output looks like. So I go to output, and then I click on viewer, and I left click there. I'll drop it into the node editor. If I connect the image to this image here, it's going to output this result to the viewer and display that for us. Now, in order for it to display it, we have to turn on this backdrop checkbox right here. And as we do that, you'll see that our image pops in the background. Now, in order to get this image to shrink down, if you just scroll with your middle mouse button, you're only going to affect the nodes, and the backdrop's going to stay where it is. So if you hit the V key on the keyboard, it'll shrink that down. If you hit Option V, it'll make it bigger. So if you hold Option, you can then middle mouse button drag, and it will allow you to move that around. So let's just reposition things here. And let's first get into a little bit about how to do some basic color correction. So all we have right now is we have a render layer connected to our viewer, this input going to this output. And if you want to affect things like the image here for colors or brightness, things like that, all you have to do is put nodes in the path of this connection here, and it will process those like it does with layers in a program like Photoshop or another image editing program. So let's go to add and then click color, and then I'm going to go over to hue saturation value. So if I left click this, I could drop it here by left clicking, but if I hover over that line, see it turns orange, it's going to automatically connect the input and outputs for me if I left click. So image to image there, and we're not seeing any changes yet because we haven't made any modifications to this. But if we change any of these values here, you're going to see a difference on this image when you click on this viewer node. So hue, by shifting this, we can change some of the overall colors in the scene to whatever we think is best. So by doing this, you can tone the image different directions depending on what the look is that you're going for. Saturation will of course bring up how intense those colors are. All the way down to nothing, it will turn your image into a grayscale image. So turn this up a little bit here. And then value is going to kind of control how bright those colors are. So by adding little nodes in here, we can alter things like color. You can also come in here, and there's just a ridiculous range of nodes that you can use to alter all sorts of things. Some of these are going to be useful just for tweaking things on your image. Some of them are dedicated to actually working with video, things like that. Another thing we could try to do is come in here, and if you're more comfortable with Photoshop, you might be aware of RGB curves. So if we introduce that here, we'll hit X to delete that, reconnect. I can tweak everything like I would normally tweak with curves in Photoshop. So if I wanted to increase some of the contrast, I could do this, kind of tweak that a bit with my lights and darks. And then of course you can always select those different color channels and add or remove color as you feel is necessary. So pretty quickly get some really intense color changes here if you know how to use the curves plugin, and it's always something good to learn because you get a lot more control with this one. Alright, so let's go over doing something that I think you guys are going to find useful when you're doing a lot of your renders, and that is to set up depth of field with your camera. Now there is an option within Blender to automatically set up depth of field. It's pretty useful, especially if you're going to go into using cycles here, which we haven't covered in this course. But if you're using the default rendering engine, I thought you might want to know how to do it with the node editor. So let's go over how to do that. I'm going to click this, hit X, get rid of that, and let's go over how to use this Z pass here to create depth of field. Now if you don't know what depth of field is, it's basically when you take a photograph and the background's blurred out and the object that you're trying to focus on is in focus. Very simple explanation. There's of course a much more technical explanation of how that works. But anyways, I will defer to other sources for that. So let's go ahead and connect this Z to the viewer here. Okay, so right now if we connect the Z pass to the viewer, you're going to see this just plain white image, and at first look it doesn't look like anything's there, but there actually is information contained within this view here. You just can't see it because it's compressed down. So let me kind of explain how that works in terms of the camera. Let's go back to the 3D view. As you can see, I've got my sphere here on this ground plane, and I've got a camera that's fairly far away with a high focal range, so it looks like we're zoomed in. Now if you see this line going all the way out past the sphere here, past to the ground, that goes all the way back up to the beginning of the camera, that's your clip start and your clip end for the scene. So if you go over to your camera settings and you check this clipping section here, you've got a start and you got an end. Start should be almost 0, if not 0. If I move this up or down, you can see how it changes that range. So I usually bring this all the way down. End will control how far your camera actually sees before it stops rendering. So for this scene, I saw that when we went into the camera view, if I actually have another view up here, such as the side view, what you can see is if I'm inside the camera view, you know that nothing outside of this realm of the viewport is going to render. So the end really doesn't have to be anywhere beyond what you can see. Now, all I did was I turned this end value up until I saw all of the grid in that bottom camera view come into place. And somewhere around 18, between 18 and 22 is where I felt safe to turn that up. And the reason this is important is because if you've got a huge scene, maybe you're rendering a whole city, or just something that has a lot of objects in it, if you have your clip turned all the way up to something like 100, which is usually default in Blender, your software is going to be calculating ray tracing and anything else you have turned on for all of the objects out here that you're not even looking at in your 3D, your render. So that's going to waste a lot of time when you go to render your scene, and anything you can do to save render time is really going to be helpful. So you want to turn this down as much as you can if it's not going to affect your scene. Now this may get complicated when you're working with animation, but anytime you're just doing a still image, you should always be in complete control over this start and end clipping value, and it can go a long way in helping you save render time. So let's jump back to our node editor. Now that I've kind of explained what is going on with that, make that full screen. Okay, so the reason that you're only seeing white here is because anything that's really far away from the camera is white, and anything close to the camera, like this ball here, should be black. And the reason that you're not seeing any of the black is because there's a lot more distance in terms of the camera from beginning to end than there is from the clip end if it had just stopped right at this sphere. So if we re-rendered this scene with the clip end ending at the sphere instead of back out here, then you would probably see some black in this image here, which is essentially what we need in order to use the depth path for something useful. So let's get into how to bring back this information without having to re-render the scene, and in order to use it for the depth pass that we're going to create. So we're going to go up to add, and then if we go up to converter, and at the very top of this we have this this math node we can bring out. If we click that and then drop it into that orange line, it'll connect it for us. And if we switch this to divide instead of add, and then we type in the value that we have for our clip end right here, it's going to compress the information in that white space down for us. So where everything in the white is the background, it's far away, everything that's blacker is close up. Now this is getting a little more useful, but again, it's not something that's really going to allow us to change drastic information for the blur. So you're not going to see anything but a really subtle blur effect if we use this. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to crush these values a little bit. I'm going to go to add down here and then go to converter again, and now I'm going to select color ramp, and we're going to add this after the divide node. Alright, so this basically has a color ramp from black to white, and it's going to allow us to take the white parts of the image and modify those, and the black parts of the image and modify those. So if I bring this white in here, it's going to go back to where we were. It's going to take out the black. If we bring the black up, it's going to go the other way. It's going to give us more of that black back into the image. So if we bring this about halfway up, maybe a little more, you're going to get what we hope to get with an original Z-Pass, which is everything in the foreground being dark and everything in the background being much lighter. So now we're at a position where we can potentially use this to give us some nice blur effects. So let's talk about how to add that in with another node. If we go to filter and then a defocus right here, click that, we'll drop this up here. What we can do is connect the image to image here, and then we can connect image again to another viewer. I'm going to select the viewer here, hit Shift D to duplicate that. I'm going to connect this to this image viewer. So now if I click this, it's going to show the Z-Pass. If I click this, it's going to show the image originally that we had rendered. So defocus typically is just going to blur the image based on the parameters that we set up. So in order to feed it information that's useful, where it doesn't just blur the entire image, what we're going to do is we're going to pass through the result of these two nodes to the Z input you see here. So after it gets done with the color ramp, we're going to pull this over, put it into the Z value here, and that's going to allow us to use the depth information to blur just what we want to blur. So on the Z scale, we're going to need to turn this up so that we're going to see some blur using that blur information. So as we crank this up, you can see now the sphere is still in focus. I'm going to make this a little bigger so you guys can see that. The sphere and the edges are still in focus right here, but as you can see, the background is now blurring out. So if I slowly turn this down, you can see that background comes back into focus. So again, I'm going to set this to somewhere around 22 for the clip end, because that's what our camera is set at. And as you can see, very quickly, we've added some nice little depth of field into our scene. And again, this can all be tweaked if you come into color ramp and you move this black value around. It's going to change what's in focus, what's not. As you can see, the sphere is getting more and more in focus as I crank this up, but then so is the background. So you need to find kind of a happy value between the sliders of these inputs and output values. So I know I want the sphere to be in focus, so I need to pull this at least up to here, and then I can control with the white slider how much of my background is in focus. So if I bring that out, it's going to fade from the shadow all the way back to more blur. If I bring this up towards the black, you can see that it's a pretty sharp fall off from the edge of that sphere into a completely blurred out background here. It all depends on the effect you're going for, and it can all be changed on the fly. No need to go over here and render your image over and over again. And that is really the strength of the node editor and the compositor, is that if I had to do this in Blender and then re-render, I would be wasting an hour for this image every single time I render again. So just by separating the Z-pass, tweaking that, and then combining it with this defocus node, I'm now able to tweak this as little or as much as I need to, all after the fact that we rendered. So I hope you enjoyed this lecture, and in the next lecture, which is the final lecture in this section, I'll cover taking our fire hydrant scene and setting it up for rendering, and that will be it. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the final lecture.